Hi everybody, I'm Latrina Patrick. Welcome to day 4 of our 90-day grant writing workshop tutorial. So if you've been with us, you know that we are on a 90-day journey to help you learn how to write a successful grant. Now, yesterday we talked a lot about the funding agencies and the various types of funding agencies there are, and today we are going to talk about RFAs, or what we refer to as a request for funding applications. So whenever funders have money that they want to award, what they do is they do that process through an application process. And federal government may call it a requesting for application. You'll see more commonly referred to as a RFP, which means it's a request for proposals. So these are the requirements that they outline in this document for everything that needs to happen for you to be successful at receiving their grant monies. Now, this is going to include your eligibility requirements. It's going to include how much funding they're making available, for who, for what time period. This is what I like to refer to as your Bible, because once you're in that process, especially for a federal or a state application, you really have to refer to this source over and over again because it's really long and it has all the instructions that you'll need. And so the key is to get very familiar with that before you even step forward in trying to write the actual grant. The main things that you want to be looking for when you review this document is what they're funding, how much they're funding, as I said before. You want to look at when the grant is due because you want to make sure you have a sufficient amount of time. If it's a simple grant, then that's okay, but if it's a state grant or a federal grant, it's going to take a lot more work, and you want to make sure that you're capable of doing the work in whatever time they've allotted for it. So you want to see when it's due, and you also want to see the eligibility requirements to make sure that your organization is actually appropriate for this particular program. As we talked about yesterday, you don't want to just be chasing dollars. You want to make sure that you're getting a good match. So that needs to become your Bible, and I always recommend that you go through that multiple times. I always say do a first read just to skim the highlights, and then go back and look specifically at what it is that they're trying to do, and then when you're almost about to wrap the grant up, then you want to go through there again and make sure that you've covered all the mandatory items that they listed that are a must before you can even submit the grant. So when you talk about a corporation or a foundation grant, their process is a little simpler, but they do outline their criteria, whether it's through an RFP or whether it's through a section on their website. The main thing you want to do with corporations and foundations, though, is make sure that you have been invited to submit a proposal. The majority of the times, they will not accept unsolicited proposals, and a lot of times people can get overzealous and look up a foundation and just go to sending in an application. Well, they won't accept that if they haven't requested it. So you want to make sure you're aware of what their guidelines are. They will typically make those guidelines available on their website, and you'll have links that you can access. If they don't have a website, then you can just look up the phone number, which I seriously doubt they don't have a website in today's time, but just look up the phone number and get the information from whoever it is that you would call, because they'll be able to tell you when and how you need to submit your application. But the main thing is that you really want to make sure that whether it's a federal or a state or a foundation or whatever, that you follow instructions. I can honestly tell you that the main reason most grants are not funded is because people don't follow the instructions. It's really simple. The process, as I said, is hard work, but the process itself is actually really simple, and we have a tendency sometimes to complicate the process by trying to give people what we think that they want to hear and instead giving them what they asked. So don't get caught up in trying to paint a picture that you want to tell, but just give them the information that they're asking for, and that will increase your probability of being funded, because most people won't follow instructions. And when I say the instructions, I mean page requirements. Those documents are going to tell you the page limits for getting your proposal in, so be mindful of that. Even the font size. If they say they want a 12-point font, give them a 12-point font. Don't try to give them 11.5 or 11 so you can squeeze in more information. I promise you, especially when it comes to federal and state grants, they check those things. And I mean check them with like a ruler to make sure that your margins and your font sizes are what they're supposed to be. And it may sound silly to you, but honestly they do this because it's just a way to gauge if you're going to be honest. And if you won't be honest about, accepting the page limits and the fonts, if you would try to sneak that in, they feel like, what would you do when you get this money that you probably wouldn't abide by the rules then too? So make sure you abide by the rules, because people are checking in what they call a pre-screening process. So when those grants are submitted, it's pre-screened before it ever goes on to the reviewer. They pre-screen it just to make sure you met the basic requirements. So make sure that you are mindful of what the requirements are and that you follow them to the T, because it is important and it can make the difference about whether or not you get funded. So let's talk for a second about federal grant requirements, because these are a little different than most grants. As I said before, they are much harder to get and they require a lot more work, so there are a lot more stipulations and things you have to follow. Well, the federal government has done something over the past few years to streamline the process, because they do get inundated with a lot of applications. And so now, in order to apply for a federal grant, you have to be registered under grants.gov. That is where it's like a clearinghouse for all federal grants. So all the federal agencies who award grants, they are in this system. It's not a hard thing for you to do. It's a simple process, but if you are an organization that is prepared to apply for a federal grant and you're eligible to do that, then you want to make sure that your organization is registered under grants.gov. You only have to register once, but once you're registered, you can apply for any federal grant. Even if you're not there yet, if you know that you're going to in the future apply for that, I recommend that you go ahead and get registered in the system regardless of what your status is, because you want to get that out of the way. You don't want to burn up the time that you have in getting ready to submit your federal grant, because that takes a little time. It could take a week or so to get all that stuff done that grants.gov requires, like the registrations and things like that. So you don't want to spend your grant writing time on that. So get that out of the way so that when it's time and they release a grant application, you're typically going to have 30 to 45 days to get it done and submitted. And so that's not a lot of time for a major project. And so get that done as soon as you can, and then put all your energy during that time frame to get it submitted on actually writing the best grant that you could possibly write. So just go to www.grants.gov, and it's a page dedicated to what you need, how to apply for a federal grant, and it's a database of every grant in the federal government that's available. So make sure you're familiar with that process. There's one more piece of information that I think is very important for you to know when it comes to applying for federal grants or even foundation or corporation grants. Be very mindful of what those grant cycles are. The more that you can be aware of when a particular funder makes funds available, the better you can prepare to get your grant ready and to submit a more successful grant. As I mentioned before, when you're writing for a federal grant in particular, you're typically going to have about 30 to 45 days to get it done. That's not a lot of time, especially if your organization is just trying to get your program off the ground and you're not currently funded and it's a new program. So what you want to do is be mindful of federal cycles, or even cycles for giving for corporations and foundations, because they give certain intervals of the year. So for example, a typical foundation they will often accept applications around the time that they have their board meetings, which for many are maybe once or twice a year or every quarter at best. So they will typically have a grant cycle leading up to that board meeting. And so they'll want everything submitted and reviewed prior to that meeting so that the board can vote on whether or not they're going to approve those awards. So be mindful of their cycles, and they will tell you on their website. And so since most of these long-standing foundations and giving entities have repeating cycles, if you don't get it this year, you can go after it next year, and at least next year you'll be more prepared because you know what to expect and you get the time to prepare it and give them what they need. So be mindful of their cycles. When it comes to like a federal grant, their cycles are very specific. Many of their grants are repeated. Certain programs they fund every year if they have it within the budget, and some of them are one time only, but for some of the main ones, they will come around again. With federal grants, they have the federal fiscal year begins October 1st and ends September 30th. So looking at it from that perspective, they are pretty much getting their new budget together in those first couple of months. Anytime between January to about April or May-ish, they are accepting applications for the next fiscal year. So they are soliciting proposals for their grant programs around between January and April. And then during the summer months, May and June, maybe a little into July, they are reviewing those grants. So they're pulling people together from all over the country to review those grants. Then they make their announcement about who was awarded the funding around August, if you're lucky, but it's usually around September, pushing the end of that fiscal year. And then they send out those awards, and they expect those programs to start in the new fiscal year. So the more familiar you can become with the grant cycles, the better you improve your chances of getting funded, because you can prepare early and you know what to expect. So that wraps up this session on funding announcements. I hope you learned a lot about how you can respond to that and write the best grant you possibly can. If you have any questions about anything that we've covered today, just leave your comments here on our YouTube page. And while you're here, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you can get immediate notification as soon as I upload a new video every day. Now, speaking of that, I will send out a notification every week, every Monday, to let you know what's coming up that week. That way you can plan in advance and make sure you plug in on those days for those sessions that you don't want to miss. You only have to go over to my website at www.greatervisionconsulting.com to get that done. And as a gift to you for doing that, I will send you a free Grant Writers Toolkit, which has a proposal template in there, a budget sample, a letter of support sample, so that you can see how to write those letters to get support from your community partners. And you'll also have a page that's a great referral source for new grant writers to tell you all the great websites and resources that you'll need to write a great grant. So make sure you go over to the website and sign up for that so you can get your free gift. In the meantime, I look forward to having you back here tomorrow when we continue our discussion on how to write winning grants. It's been great being with you today, and I will see you tomorrow.